Okay, good morning, everybody. Thursday, February 19th, 2026. I'm Ryan Dorsey, Chair of the Land Use and Transportation Committee. Welcome everybody that's here today. To my left today, we have Mr. Council President Zeke Cohen. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Great. We have Councilman Zach Blanchard here. And we will have some other committee members trickling in here as we get rolling. We have obviously a wonderful cohort of folks from the Department of Transportation, Baltimore City Department of BCIT, and the Mayor's Office of Performance Innovation. Director Macbeth, how are you today?
I'm fantastic. How are you, sir?
I'm great. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. Tony, good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Our staff member, Tony Levitt, to my right. We are following up, so it's our first oversight hearing in this committee of 2026. We are continuing our conversations about operations and outcomes in three areas: parking enforcement, street lighting, and community engagement with DOT. We began this conversation early last year with a series of hearings on these subjects. We've done follow-up on them, both in hearings and in private follow-up meetings and other communications. We're going to start today with a 15-minute presentation from DOT. They have slides prepared. And after that, we will go through each of these three topics one by one. I will start each topic with a few minutes of a few slides that I have prepared here to give a little additional insight, should it be necessary, on each of these topics before we delve into discussion on each topic. So after going through the DOT slides, we'll come back to parking enforcement and some slides about that and discussion, and then street lighting and so on. Good morning. We have council members Gray and Parker with us this morning. And so I will hand it over to DOT to, I'm gonna hand it over to the council president to make a little opening statement here as well. Sorry, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me to participate in today's hearing and to provide some opening remarks. I know that our chair is going to take us on a deep dive of the content, so I wanted to remind us, as he did, why we're here and why legislative oversight matters. Here is concrete progress that this committee's work, in collaboration with DOT, the administration, and my staff, has delivered over the past year. DOT restored 24/7 parking enforcement for the first time since the COVID-19 pandemic, and citations are up. We now have a single category through which residents can report parking complaints. It never made sense that there were two. DOT and the Law Department have developed a draft contract to govern street lighting maintenance to replace the ineffective handshake agreement that has been in place for decades. DOT is building an inventory that matches knockdown street lights to the parts needed to restore them. DOT has a contract in place to purchase steel bases for streetlights for the first time since COVID-19 pandemic. DOT has developed written standard operating procedures for community engagement. I appreciate all of those additions and the collaborative work that was done with this committee to get us there. This committee identified oversight topics based on Baltimoreans' priorities. It worked with DOT to assess current operations and made recommendations for improvements. The committee has held 3 public hearings and many more internal work sessions with DOT to move the work forward. This is how I expect this body to perform oversight collaboratively, transparently, and with clear outcomes in mind. While I am encouraged by the progress made to date and grateful for the collaboration across branches, I remain frustrated by a lack of progress, or in some cases, a failure to recognize that progress is still needed. As you'll hear today, there are around 8,000 open parking enforcement-related 311 service requests. Department of Transportation has a backlog of over 4,700 abandoned vehicle requests, and we haven't heard a plan to address this beyond closing out certain requests that are more than 90 days old. DOT's street lighting parts inventory is worse than it was at last year's hearing, and we haven't heard a plan to address this. DOT's community engagement SOPs still don't comply with the Complete Streets Ordinance, and we haven't heard a plan to address this. I expect this agency, like all agencies, to operate with transparency and accountability. That means acknowledging where the department falls short and setting objectives for improvement that align with the public's expectations. In too many areas, we haven't heard this agency articulate its vision for success. More than anything else, that's what we are here to demand today. Baltimoreans expect us to work together to solve their problems. Baltimoreans expect us to hold ourselves and each other accountable. That's why we're having this conversation in public today, and that's why this oversight matters. I look forward to a productive conversation. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director Macbeth.
Thank you, Mr. President. We'll go over to DOT now to present some slides and talk us through. No more than 15 minutes? Okay.
All right. Good morning, Chairman Dorsey and Council President and members of the committee. As stated before, I'm Veronica Macbeth, Director of Baltimore City Department of Transportation, and I am joined by more than several members of our wonderful DOT family today, as well as BSIT and the Mayor's Office of Innovation. So I appreciate the opportunity to come before this body again. I feel like I spend a lot of time with you guys in here and away from here, and I love it. So excited to share with you the updates that we have been working on some over the last few months and where we are headed this year. So next slide. So this is the agenda we'll be working with. We'll be talking about safety, street lighting, our community engagement program, and we'll begin with parking enforcement. So we are starting off strong with safety. Council President mentioned some of the things that we have been actively working on and making some positive and substantive changes within our safety division. And after careful review of things within our safety division, specifically within parking enforcement operations, we've identified the several areas that had needed targeted improvement. And we've already made some of those improvements with a lot more to come in the near future. So parking enforcement challenges. This map dictates and shows the enforcement backlog that we have within the city. So 7,400 parking complaint SRs, and of those, there are 3,500 abandoned vehicles, so just a little under half. DOT has had limited success in tackling our parking enforcement backlog, although we are employing a number of strategies to remedy the problem. And while we have seen considerable reductions in the abandoned vehicle backlog, the number is still far too high. So I look forward to questions regarding this, and I have some great assistance about things that we're working with our Tiger team that is helping us address this backlog. And taking a deeper look into parking enforcement, here are some iterative solutions. So the processes that we're using to identify the priority work and requests, the co-developing of technology currently being piloted for TOs and our dispatchers, and updating policy, which in finalizing improved SR closure and the expiration rules associated with it. So in order to address these outstanding issues, we have partnered with OPI to address these challenges through our Tiger team. So the Tiger team will build a new dispatching process based on staff and operational needs, and they'll develop technology in-house and provide guidance when seeking external tools and overhaul our SR processes and workflows. Now, traffic management. So we know our TOs are kind of threadbare in the sense that we're spread out where we have to use traffic enforcement as well as parking enforcement. So resources have to be allocated in such a way. So enforcement staff has now been bifurcated. So we have traffic enforcement officers and we have parking enforcement officers. And with parking enforcement activities, they're balanced with the events that are related to and emergency traffic management needs, especially during our peak seasons. So peak seasons being times around when there are city events, city organized events, concerts, stadium events, and things of that nature. And as we know, parking enforcement activities are balanced, related around emergency traffic management needs, peak traffic hours, and during our peak season. And traffic management is the high priority functions that help to keep road users safe during emergencies, during peak traffic hours and high congestion periods. So DOT has drafted a fee schedule that will reflect the cost of providing traffic management services as part of these events for the upcoming event season. So as I mentioned, these events help make our city a very major cultural center and destination while also generating revenue to support and improve upon our core functions and to grow economic development in the city. And one note I want to make sure that I say is that our TOs are often required to be present at these large group events, which again can take away some of the importance of us having to be dedicated to do parking enforcement at the exact same time. License plate readers. So the LPR pilot QA testing of the hardware and process started in February 2026, and it's active in 7 virtual RPP zones right now. So the pilot trials of the LPR readers are set to begin this month. And while introducing the LPRs has taken a lot longer than anticipated, we have worked closely with our partners at the Parking Authority and VSIT to improve the operations and core functions by incorporating this much needed technology. And our goal is to allow the LPRs to simultaneously enforce residential parking permits and invalid permits. And so far, the LPRs have been tested in 4 of the city's 7 LPR areas, virtual LPR areas, virtual RPP areas, and tests have shown them to be reliable thus far. So our team is developing SOPs to ensure that LPRs are used in a consistent and predictable way. And we plan to begin training staff on the use of these LPRs in the coming weeks. So this bar graph, I'd like to talk a little bit about data. This is monthly citations increasing over time. It's a little difficult to see, but hopefully you can kind of zoom in and see it. I'd like to share the data highlighting our progress since we have expanded our enforcement operations. The blue bars refer to citations issued prior to the expanded enforcement, while the yellow bars refer to citations issued after the expanded enforcement that began in March last year. So we've seen a consistent increase in citations issued since the launch of 24-hour enforcement. And despite the initial challenges that we did face, we have achieved a higher volume of citations and are on track to issue a record number of citations compared to previous years. And this is in part due to our focus on proactive enforcement per this committee's suggestion. Next section is street lighting. So we're gonna switch gears here and talk about it. So we have to be honest, we've run into many eye openers here. We've had several one-on-one sessions with this committee talking about streetlights. And while we have maneuvered around these issues for many years, Our work with the committee has presented an opportunity to center and address these problems. So the challenge, where are the streetlights? Which ones have issues, and who is responsible? So we have historically struggled to keep tabs on our portfolio of streetlights, and this creates gaps in information and resulting in supply shortages and delays. We're often trying to figure out whether it's BGE, whether it's our responsibility, and the like. So to solve this, we are partnering with OPI yet again to identify opportunities for improvements for this process. And our goal here is to create a comprehensive live inventory of street lighting assets. And this will help us identify what we own and what conditions it's in. So as you can see at the top of the slide, we're identifying lights that BGE has not recorded, but we have yet to record, and we're trying to build a full inventory based on both the ones that we have existing and the ones that they have existing, but we do not. So we have drafted and delivered a street lighting agreement to BGE, and we are scheduling work sessions to discuss these things in details. So last year, the committee asked DOT to develop an agreement on maintenance and replacement of streetlights, and thus far on our streetlight agreement, it's ongoing. We have made significant progress and now are awaiting BGE's concurrence. And so we had shared the agreement right before Thanksgiving, and we're still awaiting some comments back from BG&E. So our ability to keep up with the demand for streetlight replacement has been hampered by the lack of having a complete inventory of all of our streetlights. And as a result of intentional and data-driven procurement efforts, we have entered into a contract with MVA Power that will provide the city with up to 250 bases per year. And this contract should cover our needs for the next 2 to 4 years. This number is in contrast to the 350 or so steel bases the city has procured over the past 6 years. So in addition, we have also stocked up on several types of light poles that were previously in short supply. And this should considerably speed up how quickly we can replace missing streetlights. So we've also heard the committee's concerns about the complexity of street lighting requests, and we are evaluating how a consolidated street light request could work to ensure how it can be implemented successfully. And in short, customers should tell us what they know so we can determine what to do and not the other way around. So this could shift the onus to obtain results from residents to agency support staff. And last on the list is community engagement. So finally, just to get a hold on this, stakeholder understanding and support is a crucial part of any project, as we know. And our recent work in community engagement is an area that is reflective of that. So first, we're working on an updated SOP for community engagement as a part of larger projects, and talk a little bit more about that in a bit. And when it's completed, this SOP will improve timeliness and accountability by explicitly outlining steps and responsibilities. And I want to note that we are making sure that it embodies the Complete Streets guidelines as well. We're also in the early stages of deploying an updated solution to track elected officials' concerns, and this is meant to be a permanent system that will record and archive notable issues, facilitating tracking and preserving knowledge that will be useful in the future. So elected official engagement. So as a standard of practice, we now provide a preliminary briefing at the start of a project and a briefing on project plans before starting community outreach and advance notice before construction begins. Last year alone, we had over 50 routine meetings and project briefings with city council members. And as a rule of thumb, a project will follow this process if it is significant enough to meet a merit for Streets of Baltimore page. And on that note, DOT did launch the Streets of Baltimore page to better connect our communities. So residents can subscribe to individual projects and be updated as a new information becomes available. And we have published twice as many pages in 2025 as we have in years past. And this represents nearly half of all the pages published over the website's 4 years in operation. So the accelerated adoption of our public website has made it easier than ever for residents to stay in the loop about projects. So in terms of the website's reach, we've had 55,000 visitors over the past year and over 143,000 since the site was launched back in 2021. And our most popular page was the e-bike page with 3,600 signups, followed by West Baltimore United with 719. So the website has over 2,000 unique subscribers for it. So in closing, it is clear that our staff has worked hard and made strides towards addressing the issues raised by this body. And in partnership with the Land Use and Transportation Committee, we've identified and started implementing the solutions to address some of the longstanding issues. And we've expanded our parking enforcement and towing services to provide expanded coverage. We've included the ability for residents to retrieve their vehicles from the tow yard from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. We've tested technological solutions for TOs to dispatch and prepare for the wide deployment of LPRs. We've begun to correct gaps in our street lighting operations and secured a supply of critical parts. And we've begun to revamp how we engage with our stakeholders. And the nature of our work at DOT means that we're constantly putting our proverbial fires, which often limits our ability to be proactive. However, we are grateful to the committee for highlighting key issues that have allowed us to focus on targeted improvements to better meet the needs of the citizens of Baltimore. So looking forward to answering any questions. And just to note, our plans for 2026 are simple. We will put license plate readers into regular operations and evaluate their potential for expanded use. We'll focus on replacing knockdown streetlights promptly, continue to work with BG&E on our MOU and developing a consistent data set, continue to work and standardize the way we do project outreach, and to allow you and your constituents to have consistent and predictable project information. So that's it. Thank you for your time and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Okay, we have a few slides here. I want to get us into discussion about parking enforcement. I do want to note the council president has to leave at 10 o'clock, and I want to make sure that he has an opportunity to ask a question about street lighting before that time comes. But we'll dive right into parking enforcement first. Tony, next slide. Just as a reminder, overview, this is kind of how things have gone so far. We had our initial meetings on these subjects, parking enforcement, street lighting, community engagement in February, April, and March of 2025. We did a follow-up hearing on parking enforcement and street lighting in July, and then we went through the summer and into the fall, and then we had another hearing scheduled to follow up on all three of these topics for December of last year, and then we postponed that. And so this is that rescheduled hearing. When we talk about parking enforcement, I guess a few things. I want to note, in the council president's opening statement, he commented on the importance of setting objectives for improvement. And for me, every one of these topics is about setting objectives, setting goals, telling us, having a clearly articulable statement of like, what is the outcome that we are looking for? And I feel like we've made progress on facets of performance or aspects of what will aid us in, aid the department in performance improvements. But to me, that doesn't seem that they're necessarily yet incorporated into a like end goal, end outcome that we're looking for specifically. We have had a lot of conversation about proactive enforcement. Our slide talks about violation hotspots, but I think the overarching idea is priority areas. And we'll have, I know that we have some questions related to setting priorities based on modal hierarchy. We've had some discussion about the unified 311 service request category. And I know we'll have some questions about it's the kind of implementation of technology changes and with that dispatching process improvements. And noted here this idea of a 15-minute timeline, which is what I have kind of consistently brought up, is saying like, when we're talking about like having to have a goal, setting a goal for like what is the outcome service level that we're looking for, not just like what is the service, the SLA that's set, tied to our 311 service request types right now, but what is the level of performance that we want to achieve in tangible terms for providing a public service to the citizens of Baltimore. And what that, you know, and for me, like a good expression of that goal would be like being able to respond to 311 requests in a 15-minute timeline, but also carving out space for saying like not every 311 request is going to be about something of like an urgent level of response need. Not everyone is going to be some car blocking a crosswalk or some car sitting parked in a bus stop. These kind of things that need to be responded to in a very rapid manner if they're to be effective in deterring this behavior in the future. But that for things like abandoned vehicles, they can't go 2 days or 4 days or 10 days or 30 or 90 days. They need to be within a day or something like that. Whatever our expression of a goal is, we need to have it and not just say, well, here's what our SLA is right now. We asked DOT in the letter that we sent on December 23rd to give particular attention to this area as sort of an example of a place where we can set a priority based on modal hierarchy, where we have this 2-hour per day bus lane on Charles Street, which is one of the most heavily trafficked transit corridors in the entire United States. And yet, for years as it has existed, there's been essentially no enforcement of this bus lane, allowing it to be obstructed during those very small, that window, Monday through Friday, 4 to 6 p.m. And in the course of a month, we saw only 5 tickets issued for actually parking in a bus lane. And that's, I don't understand how that works, and we'll have some questions about that. We had this unified service request that was a consolidation of what had existed before as a parking enforcement complaint, a parking complaint service request, and the abandoned vehicle service request combined into one hopefully streamlined process for how we can then dispatch with the same level of reliability to both of these things, whereas we have been getting very, very different results between the parking enforcement SR and the abandoned vehicle SR. DOT has faced real challenges in implementing this over the last half a year or so. Along with those technology improvements, we've seen difficulty in the dispatch process and are kind of having to go back to square one in trying to determine what is the process by which we're going to dispatch folks out. Again, I'm supposing that we could and should set a goal for something like being able to respond to all service requests within 15 minutes. Or at least decided upon categories of service requests. We've had such difficulty in use of the Salesforce Worker app that after many months of attempting to make it work, it's been discontinued. And we've had problems. We've had even the reintroduction of the idea of allowing DPW to dispatch DOT employees, which really is very disruptive to the accountability process for expecting outcomes and service levels to be met by DOT for a service that everybody expects DOT to serve. And then we've had, and all of this has resulted in, even while we've seen a significant increase in parking enforcement citations being issued, correlating to essentially a 50% increase in the hours that parking enforcement was occurring by adding the overnight shift. We have nonetheless, coinciding with that increase in ticketing, seen a huge backlog open up of SRs that have not gone responded to. So we have questions, I think, about all of these things. And I think I've touched on these things here already, but it's worth noting that abandoned vehicles are still being tracked in a paper-based process through the multi-step process. This was the last update that we received, and having received this update that we were still using a paper-based process, we, in our letter in December, requested those paper tracking forms for a random selection of 3 abandoned vehicle issues that that we just pulled out of a hat, and where we knew that there had been a prolonged response time, and we didn't get those abandoned vehicle forms in any of those 3 cases. And so it's unclear, like, even if there is this process, and if there is this process, is it actually being adhered to? And if anybody thinks that this is the right process. And so I'll stop there on parking enforcement as my just short kind of overview, so that we can come to some questions. I'm going to go to the council president first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. While I'm glad more attention has been put on parking enforcement in the form of a Tiger team, and always appreciate the partnership of my favorite musketeer and the good folks at OPI, I'd like to talk about how we got to this point and ensure that we have a clear understanding of what this team is tasked with doing. And as we've discussed, I noted in my opening remarks, the initial public-facing phase of this work was a success. A single through-on-one service request category that included abandoned vehicles reported launched July 25th, 2025. But as the chair has indicated, phase 2 is where we saw problems. And the key problem was that TEOs couldn't separate open and closed service requests when they viewed them on their mobile devices. According to the documents provided to the committee, DOT learned in November 2025 that it would take 1,600 hours and at least $175,000 to fix this issue and finish the work. From my perspective, the department tried to implement a technological solution. That solution failed, and now I'm not seeing a clear path to resolve these issues. Director Macbeth, what lessons has the department taken away from this experience? Specifically, will the department revise procedures to require a formal needs statement and scope to be developed prior to the pursuit of a further technological solution?
Thank you for your question, Mr. President. I think absolutely. I think we've taken up residents with working with OPI and BSIT to reevaluate the resources that we have and working to establish in-house resources for projects like this. As I mentioned in my remarks, OPI is helping us create and establish in-house resources to help address some of the challenges that we've had with our TO hardware and software. And I think also, I would say some of the other challenges that we may face is the training components, right? Is so once software is redistributed amongst our staff, that there's kind of a gap in where they're having to be trained and relearn new software. And I think that's one of the components that we also need to equally focus on. But absolutely, we are looking to make sure that we don't have these kind of failures in the future. And it's kind of a component of a larger issue, is that this is one of our key performance indicators, right? More broadly within the agency, things that we're tracking as we look at our agency's performance overall. This is just one of the things that falls within the guise of that. And so we're just looking at ways that we can better strategize and use our teammates at BSIT, our teammates at OPI to help us do these things better. And I would ask either D'Artagnan and or Eric if they wanted to chime in at all to talk about the components and the assistance that they're providing with us for these services.
Sure thing. Hi, good morning, everybody. So through CityStat, right, we monitor high-profile issues like parking enforcement and others. And when we note that there's a sustained sort of performance issue or decline, we activate a Tiger Team. So in this case, last month, we launched a Tiger Team focused on parking enforcement. And on slide 5 of the deck, we talked through the 3 areas that we are prioritizing. And so when it comes to process, right, we also want for DOT to have an optimized data-driven approach to ensure that we're deploying the resources to the right places at the right times. And so making the data available to inform what dispatch and scheduling looks like is a priority and an outcome of the Tiger Team. The second thing is we do believe that having timely access to accurate data will go a long way toward allowing for DOT and teams to monitor SRs as they come in real time to make dynamic adjustments to where we deploy TEOs. In terms of the tech, we are partnering with DOT and the frontline staff that will actually use the tool to design with them and not for them. And we think that that'll go a long way, to the director's point, toward the staff adopting the technology. We also think that that will support the goal that you mentioned, Council President, of responding to parking complaints in a more timely fashion. A good example of that would be if a parking enforcement officer is deployed on the 600 block of Pratt Street, and you're responding to and issuing citations. If a 311 complaint comes in across the street or within close proximity of them, we want to deploy tech that alerts them so that they can respond to those in a rapid way. We have built and deployed a prototype app that is in use today in 2 weeks, and we would like to be able to build on that momentum and iterate through the design of these products through the Tiger Team activation. The last thing that we'll say on the policy front is we do want for our parking enforcement officers to focus on high priority and real parking complaints. And we do understand the frustration of a resident getting a response several weeks after they've reported a parking complaint, saying that the vehicle is no longer there. So in light of that, we've taken a data-driven approach to propose a policy change that involves expiring certain requests after an expiration period that we'll align on, so that when TOs are deployed to respond to parking complaints, this will increase the likelihood of there being a vehicle for them to actually respond to. We've tested this in the field for long-standing requests and have confirmed that over 90% of the vehicles are no longer there. And so we want to, that said, we're not just going to close tickets haphazardly. We're rooting it in evidence based on actual field inspections. So that would be my update on some of the outcomes of the Parking Enforcement Tiger Team.
I appreciate that. My understanding is that DOT and BSIT are now developing a project charter, which is something like a needs statement, When will the committee receive a copy of this document?
My understanding is that part of the Tiger Team goals that were established was to identify what those needs are, and that's what kind of Dart spoke to, that they're testing that in the field. So my understanding is an outcome of that Tiger Team, and they'll define what that timeline is, but it'll be a needs statement for the technology that's required. And I would add that this technology for field use is not just a DOT ask. There are other agencies that are asking for similar things, so it'll help inform that need as well.
Okay. Can you be a little more specific about a timeline, though? That felt vague, respectfully.
I don't know.
I mean,
You can speak to that. Yeah, I think the Tiger Team is looking at providing deliverables iteratively. So I don't know, Webster or Dart, if you can speak to the timeline there.
Yeah, so as a part of the Tiger Team efforts, we are taking a holistic look to how we are even evaluating our needs. Because our previous, sorry, in previous iteration of the technological developments that we've done, we haven't deployed a strategy that yielded better results. So as a part of the Tiger Team efforts, we're being more holistic, evaluating everything, testing our needs with TEOs before we're at the stage to provide a needs assessment to the council. But our timeline currently for the Tiger Team is the next 4 months, so we should be completed by June.
Okay. I think a big part of the conversation here is about, as the chair indicated, measurable, defined, clear outcomes, goals, vision, timeline, and a path to execute. And I think where this committee wants to move us away from, and I think where the council is going to continue to push, is out of the land of fuzzy, which is just we've deployed a Tiger Team and it's doing Tiger stuff. And I don't mean that pejoratively, but into just really clear, this is the expectations and this is when it's going to deliver. So my last question on this topic, again, the council and the committee need goals and objectives that we can check in on and communicate to the public. When should the committee expect to receive the goals and objectives of the Tiger Team and the department's goals and objectives for parking enforcement dispatch?
I can speak to goals and objectives for the Tiger Team. We've worked closely with DOT to establish those for the period for which the team will be activated, which is January through June. And so we're happy to follow up with you with the goals that we've established, and we can do that shortly after this session. The way that the activation works is for us to test process and technology improvements in select footprints across the city to gauge whether or not these interventions are effective, and then work with DOT and teams on a plan to scale them. As it stands today, we do believe that the technology that we're iterating on is an effective approach, and we'll continue to iterate on that in collaboration with the traffic enforcement officers. By June, we will have an approach and a plan communicated for what this looks like to scale more broadly. And so my commitment to you is to share the Tiger Team objectives shortly after this session.
Okay, so DOT, Mr. Chair, I just want to make sure I'm clear though on the commitment. So by June 1, the Tiger Team or OPI and the assemblage of folks will share clear goals, deadlines, and strategy to implement, like the, what do we call it? The charter, project charter, that's what you are committing to on June 1?
I'll clarify what the outputs of this engagement will be. So we're running this from the beginning of January through the end of June. And there are four primary phases of the Tiger Team. The first is framing the various problems that we're having with the topics. In this case, this would be parking enforcement. And then there's goal setting. And as part of the goal setting, we want to do a few things. One, empower DOT with the data that they need to be able to do dynamic dispatch and deploy resources rapidly in real time. What that looks like is understanding what hotspots look like and how they morph over time. So in the event that we do need to make an adjustment in a dynamic way, we can. The second thing is real visibility into areas where we have not been applying parking enforcement, such as the bus lanes, so that we can come up with ways to address those gaps in service delivery. The third is usable technology that the TEOs will adopt and to optimize timely responses to parking complaints while the TEOs are in the field. So this goes back to the Pratt Street example, where the technology will notify folks within proximity that there's a service request awaiting them. And then the last bit is on the policy front. What are those things that we can do to ensure that our staff is focused on the right issues at the right times, such as expiring longstanding tickets? Throughout this activation, we're testing these improvements in select geographies, and we iterate on that to ensure that the plan that we communicate for the path forward is well-informed, has been vetted, and has the potential to scale. So to answer your question about the deliverable at the end of the activation, it would be just that. Here's what we've observed, here's what we worked, here's how we've driven, here's how we have driven improvements in the select geographies, and here's what it will take to scale this out more broadly. Please let me know if that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you, Director. And my expectation is that the iterative process is done in collaboration and consultation with this committee. Director Macbeth?
And to give you a number of time, we're expecting somewhere around June 30th, beginning of July, because that gives us the complete month of June. So that gives us the 6-month process that's expected for the Tiger Team to have. And then, so I would say around 6:30 to July 5th is approximate timing for the iterative information,
Okay, so July 5th.
thereabouts.
Don't love thereabouts.
July 5th.
Okay. Thank you, Director Macbeth. Thank you, Director D'Artagnan. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Looking forward to seeing that process play out quickly.
I'd personally like to press on this just a little bit more about DOT expressing what its goals are, right? OPI and BCIT are assisting DOT in having the tools to be able to carry out work on some level, an aspect of how DOT is able to perform its duties. But that can't determine what DOT aspires to be able to do. And what I heard in the council president's question was not just like, what are the Tiger Team's goals, but what are DOT's goals? What is the level of responsiveness that DOT believes is effective to carry out its mission, right? Like, if the goal of parking enforcement is to deter people from breaking our parking laws, and particularly in such a way that endangers people, then what is the level of responsiveness that DOT believes is necessary in order to achieve that objective? And to have that expressed to us in writing, I think, is something that doesn't get to wait 6 months until some other process of technological development, investigation, and even field testing for an aspect of service delivery plays out and tells us more. We have to have these goals up front. When can DOT provide us its goals. And I don't want to get, we have a lot to cover here, and Brendan?
Good morning. You touched on a very important and timely comment as it relates to strategic planning. You know, the agency is currently in the process of just looking at our previous and existing, what we call KPIs. So we provide service on a lot of different areas, and parking enforcement is one of those areas. We have KPIs in a variety of categories consisting of number of citations, number of vehicles booted, percentage of abandoned vehicles, percentage of parking complaints closed in a timely manner. I captured those to kind of highlight that we're having internal baseline conversations on our existing KPIs and how we can update these to better align with a lot of the issues that we're talking about today. I think we can commit, because we're already in the process of continuing to review our existing performance measures, updating those to align with, you know, the topics that we're discussing today where feasible, but most importantly, articulate our goals and objectives for these areas. I think that's a commitment that we can make. We're working closely with the Tiger team to focus on specific issues, but I know your request is
Specifically, what,
Yeah.
On what date can DOT deliver to us some expression of its goals?
Yeah. Now, we have the July 5th date. Is that okay, or does it need to be sooner than that?
I think my point is that, like, there's a lot of technological improvement that's being worked on
Yeah.
as an aspect of how to deliver service at any level whatsoever. But like at any level whatsoever is not a way of going toward an aim, a goal. I don't think that we can spend the next 6 months working toward no specific goal and being able to articulate no specific goal. We've already been in this conversation for a year without an expression of a specific goal. And I think that the outcomes are proof of what having no specific goal gets us.
I think a fair timeline for us would be about 60 days. And I say this in the essence that we've been actively working on an agency strategic plan overall and breaking down the various divisions, obviously this being one of them. We can prioritize this area and make
Okay,
sure that you
60
have-
days.
Yeah.
60 days is good for me. We will check in halfway through that just to make sure DOT is making good progress on that. We'll check in privately. I'm going to go to Councilman Blanchard now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm glad we're having this. Shucks.
We have been joined by Council Vice President and Committee Vice Chair, Councilwoman Sharon Green Middleton. Good morning. How are you today?
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Blanchard.
I'm glad we're having this meeting. Also, I want to give a quick thanks to DOT for coordinating.
I'm sorry. We have our current Council Vice President, member of the committee, Councilman John Bullock, with us. Sorry about that. Sorry. I am going to Councilman Blanchard, I swear.
Really thrown off the timing of this compliment.
You were going to compliment me on how?
No, I was going to compliment Corporal Gabriel from DOT. So anyway, so I want to appreciate, so thank you to DOT for allowing me to go on the ride along, the late night ride along. I do want to give a shout out to Corporal Gabriel from Traffic Enforcement, who is definitely way up there in my favorite city's employees list now. Deputy Director Buckner and I we're doing the ride along, and at one point he mentioned, as he was doing all his other stuff, which was very impressive, that recently he and his wife were down in Atlanta for their anniversary, and he saw one of their traffic and parking enforcement officers go in and very quickly like take some photos and then move away. And he went and followed the guy and tried to get information on how their system works on their anniversary weekend, and I was like, that's motivating. So shout out to him. All right, so, Mr. Chair, I'm glad to see DOT reporting out parking enforcement metrics on North Charles Street in Midtown and Mount Vernon. This committee has discussed at length the need for proactive enforcement, and we know the peak hour bus lane here is frequently unusable due to illegally parked cars, right? When you only have the bus lane for a couple hours and a car is parked, obviously the bus lane is not usable at all. These relatively low-cost but essential capital improvements are not effective if enforcement isn't there to maintain their usability. Just so we're on the same page here, I know that we had a lot of snow last month, and I imagine there was a period where it wasn't cost-effective and probably not safe for TOs to be giving out citations. When did your team pause or otherwise scale back operations due to Winter Storm Fern?
Good morning again. So specifically, we began the event on Saturday, January 24th. And with weather, you know, the TOs can't do parking enforcement, so we leveraged their expertise to support us with traffic management due to the snow, and especially as the event evolved from snow to ice to snow mounds, which required their expertise and support with ensuring that our roadways were safe, if that makes sense. So pretty much beginning that weekend on Saturday, the 24th.
Okay. And when did it go back to largely normal operations?
No, great question. When the emergency declaration was officially ended, and I believe that was middle of last week.
That wasn't that long after that, right?
No. It didn't officially end until it was like in the middle of last week.
Okay, so it was.
Yeah.
So anyway, so they were operating accordingly for like 2.5 weeks or something to that effect.
Correct.
It was about it was. I have to look at the exact date, and I apologize, I don't have that in front of me, so give me a second to pull the calendar. But we pulled them back into service, I want to say approximately 3 days before the official mayoral emergency declaration ended. But they were being utilized as more specific traffic enforcement because there were large mounds of snow that were visual impairments for roadways and things like that. So give me a second to look at the actual date. The 10th. Patrick, turn your
Okay,
mic on.
awesome. Thank you, Patrick. Okay. So, and let's see, so we did have and I think it's in the back of so that's good info. And we do have, I think in the back of the packet, the information on the number of citations that were enforced. So I think yeah, sure, thanks. It's the very last slide. So it's total citations issued on 800 to 1400 blocks of North Charles Street. So the 9th through the 13th of February is the one that's in here. And that was after, so most of those days were back to normal operations. Well, this data is from, yeah. Okay. So we had 13 citations in that time period. So it looks like, I mean, what's the amount of, and I think it was like 5 for the month of January we saw on the other, it was a much lower amount if I remember correctly in January. So how frequently is enforcement being done, proactive enforcement being done on these peak hour bus lanes?
Norman, can you speak to that?
Good morning. Peak hour enforcement for the 800 block to 1400 block of North Charles is being done regularly. Daily is on our agenda for the TEOs to go out and actually do enforcement in those areas. In some of the times doing that, though, sometimes the officers are or have to be reassigned for other things or other calls depending upon our attendance and that kind of thing. So, but we generally have an officer assigned to the 800 to 1400 block of Charles Street for the peak hour enforcement.
So, okay, so you're saying that it is scheduled for a parking enforcement officer to patrol the 8 to 1400 blocks of North Charles during peak hour enforcement every day?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Between
if-
4 and 6.
If they're getting pulled away from, for whatever other reason, then it may not happen for X or Y thing.
It can impact that, sir, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I know the data is a little tricky here because obviously we had the snowstorm complicated, and I appreciate the information on that. I would be interested to see how, over the next, I guess, month or so, if we can keep providing that data, and that as a committee request of this same data, looking at peak hours by start of hour, so we can see what that looks like in a month from now. And then, Tony, did you get the request? Okay. And then, so going to the kind of bigger picture here with the whole kind of set of conversations. Brief anecdote, a month and a half ago, I was walking over to pick up my little ones from daycare, and I saw no joke, a pickup truck changing his tire right in front of the bus stop in the bus lane on Charles and Lombard. It was rush hour. There were 4 buses, MTA and circulator, behind them. I counted the people in the bus. There were 62 riders who were being blocked by this one individual changing his tire, literally in the middle of a thoroughly trafficked downtown street during rush hour in the bus lane. Right, the reason that I care about this and the reason that the committee is talking about these as priorities, right, is because bus lanes are very, very important towards a functioning transportation system in the city. Effective parking enforcement is a critical aspect of making sure the bus lanes work properly. Does the department have a goal that ties proactive parking enforcement priorities to the Complete Streets modal hierarchy?
Can you, I guess, maybe explain what you're kind of inferring as far as the hierarchy of comparatively talking about are they connected as far as parking enforcement and complete streets? Yeah, I guess. That's
Yeah,
what I'm trying to-
so does the Complete Streets Manual and the priority set in it, does that inform how we prioritize where parking enforcement occurs?
Sean, can I defer to you for that? Do you know if there's, if parking enforcement is prioritized within Complete Streets, I don't see how,
No, not directly in the complete
yeah,
streets.
I don't see
So
that.
it's the point, this is going back to, right, bus lanes and other multimodal types of uses, right? That's
Right, but it's not, parking enforcement is not
Is not
directly outlined in.
tied into
Complete
it, yeah.
In Complete Streets doctrine or guidelines. Parking enforcement is not, that's why I'm saying, I'm
Right.
unsure about, your question, because parking enforcement is not directly outlined in
yeah, I think-
Complete
I think
Streets
I'm-
guidelines.
Yeah, I think you're answering my question of how, and the answer is we are not using the Complete Streets modality to prioritize things like bus lanes for more consistent enforcement. That's what it sounds like?
So what I think I hear is there an opportunity for targeted enforcement, which we do, So for example, if you or the public have identified an issue, on a modal facility, we can put together teams to do targeted enforcement, which we do. One thing I want to bring up, and Mr. Norman can elaborate on it, is that because of situations like this, we've bifurcated our staff to have a percentage of staff to focus on traffic management and also parking enforcement. And if there are situations like this where you'd like us to consider targeted enforcement, we can do that. We do that all the time, whether it's for abandoned vehicles in certain neighborhoods, if it's bike facilities, if it's bus facilities, we can definitely do that. And we do it. Yeah.
Yeah, obviously there's some intention to do it on one of the peak hour lanes, but I was just thinking
Right.
the,
And actually, Norman, definitely jump in. We're actually in the process of preparing for targeted enforcement at that specific corridor along North Charles Street.
On the, right, with
And the
the
bus lane,
stationary
yeah,
cameras?
correct,
Yeah.
correct.
Which is great, and I'm happy to see that. Basically, the bigger point of the question before I pass it back to the chair is, you know, like Pratt and Lombard, North Avenue, like there are bus lanes in the city that like the system, the transportation system depends on those lanes being effectively enforced in a way that like, and I mean, Director Macbeth knows how many times I bugged her about enforcing the late night stuff, right, in Federal Hill and whatnot, right? So like there's a lot of competing things here, but I would love for the department to have kind of a clear sense of having the priorities line up with making the transit system in the city, making sure it's adequately protected and functioning well.
Right, more cohesive.
Yeah,
Got you.
so, all right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. To put a point on this, 60 days, you guys are going to give us some goals for how to, for how you want to be able to perform parking enforcement. I would hope that those goals demonstrate some importance of aligning our parking enforcement with the way that our streets are designed to prioritize the modes of transportation that we understand to be most sustainable and vulnerable and most adversely impacted by parking enforcement violations. We have a complete streets law that determines how our streets are supposed to be designed and within a hierarchy of considerations. And then all of our other enforcement and other operations should support that goal of having streets not just that are designed, but that actually function to support that hierarchy. Councilman Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director Macbeth, and all of our DOT and other agency friends. Picking in particular, I know there's an upcoming, it's been a rescheduled trip, an upcoming trip to Pittsburgh. And so prior to getting into that a little bit, I'm just curious, what specifically has the Department of Transportation here already learned from various peer cities over the last, say, under your tenure? What kind of outreach, what other conversations have we had with peer cities regarding parking enforcement? And then what is it about Pittsburgh? Are there specific metrics or approaches in Pittsburgh that indicate they are getting it right? Have they made specific process improvements that we seek to learn from? So general question about engagement with peer cities over the last year, and then specifically, what is it about Pittsburgh that that indicates they're doing this really well, and are there specific process things that we're looking to learn from?
No, great question. That trip was initially supposed to be on January 26th, but we have a tentative date for either April 9th or 10th. But typically with peer reviews and peer conversations, you know, it's not just about best practices, but it's about the relationship. So number one, Pittsburgh was a willing peer to sit down with us and to discuss parking enforcement. But they are very innovative based on what we know as it relates to technology, specifically LPR technology they're utilizing. But I do want to set the stage of why we chose Pittsburgh is more so they're close, hour and a half, and they were a willing peer and they were available to meet. So that's why here again, they do utilize a lot of technology as it relates to parking enforcement. And to highlight, they specifically do parking enforcement, so that's also a benefit as well, whereas we do traffic management and we do parking enforcement, but they specifically do parking enforcement, so they can help inform us. Now, as far as what we're going to talk about, we've already have a draft outline to talk about their deployment strategy. You know, that's a key area of parking enforcement. Performance management, how they do fines and citations, and how they enforce and their compliance. And also while we're there, we're also going to meet with their traffic calming staff as well. So just want to communicate that, you know, we're very passionate about peer opportunities because it's really an opportunity to have a conversation. And it's also an opportunity to learn about what they do and also an opportunity to hear how we do things and to vet and provide, feedback in that area as well. So I hope that answers your question. It will be either on April 9th or 10th. We just need to confirm internally, and then we'll pursue it.
No, thank you. I really appreciate kind of the narrative description of some of the things they're doing well and the reasons why you're going there. Has there already been information shared either publicly or directly through that partner relationship, preliminary data around responsiveness and things like that give you some sense of effectiveness as well as their commitment to innovation?
We have not, had those preliminary conversations. I mean, we can get that information, but that's why the in-person. So, great question. The visit is going to be half-day sit-down to discuss a lot of these issues, but also we're going to do some field work as well. We have an opportunity to have those conversations before, but because we're doing it in person, we're going to have those questions there.
Sure. I know that in the question that the committee sent over ahead of time in the response, there were just some practical details. I'm not the most nitpicky thing about things like this. I appreciate the work, but did want to point out the committee asked for who's going to be heading to Pittsburgh, how long, what the cost is, and so again, not to nitpick, but just I think we're curious. And
what we do have readily available is an outline of that visit and what we were specifically discussing and who the attendees are. We can provide that information.
Great, I appreciate it. So part of this then goes back to what our chair and our council president laid out for us is whether it's the work we're doing internally around technology or whether it's the learning we're trying to do in Pittsburgh, knowing what our concrete goals are for parking enforcement, that the director is committed to in the next 60 days, seems to us, I think, it ought to shape exactly what you're describing in terms of what you're going to look for and all the rest. And so really curious to receive that from you all and see how I'm sure it will, but just to see how it aligns so that the energy you're putting into that is directly aimed at achieving the progress that we want to make on the goals you articulate around parking enforcement. With the chair's permission, I'm going to zoom out a little bit in the same area. I appreciate it. So I recognize you all shared data, we asked questions, data around backlogs. And backlogs obviously are really concerning, especially around abandoned vehicles. But one of the things you all point out is that, after 9 days in your responses to us, after 9 days, essentially the effectiveness of response is 0%, right? I mean, that's what it says. And so in some ways, especially with time-sensitive things like the work you all do in parking enforcement, the backlog isn't nearly as critical as the response time, right? Because there's no effective way. It's not a good use of your time to chase those old ones aside from abandoned vehicles. And so I guess my question then is, it would be really great, I guess, official committee request to have a breakdown of responsiveness to the specific kinds of complaints that are made to 311. How long is it currently taking us to have someone go out and investigate that? I know we've had those conversations before, and so I was surprised, not surprised in a negative way, but just was surprised that wasn't also then part of the kind of continuing conversation here, is continuing to look at that. Again, backlogs are important, responsiveness even more so. And so then, that ties into the overall citation data. I'm really grateful to see the progress being made and the level of citations being issued. And my second request has to do with a breakdown of how many of those citations are driven by 311 calls versus how many are proactive, our TOs being out there doing really good work, noticing things and taking action, which is a great thing. I know I've been asking for that regularly, especially around bus and street sweeping in particular, which is critically important. And so I'm glad to see the overall citations going up, and I hope that's demonstrating some really good proactivity on the part of our officers. I'm sure it is. And my fear is that, and again, we won't know until we have the results of the first question I asked around responsiveness, but my fear is that responsiveness has been slipping, and so while the overall number of citations being issued in the city or in any particular neighborhood is climbing, thanks to good work and proactive work being done, that I fear we're not close to where we ought to be in terms of when a resident has said, this is a safety issue. There is a car parked in this bus stop. There's a car parked in my handicap spot. There's a car blocking my garage. There's a car parked overnight in the alley, creating all kinds of hazardous conditions in the case of a fire response or things like that. I know I've made lots of those calls. When folks are seeing lots of proactive tickets being issued but not responsive tickets, it makes them really frustrated with the way that enforcement is happening, because when they notice a security issue and they've raised it up, it doesn't seem to be addressed. And again, that's their own personal experience. There's data that can show whether that's happening or not. But then when lots of other citations are being issued, they're like, well, I know we're issuing citations, but why is it not the thing that I raised up as a safety issue in my block or my corner, my kids walk to school, my ability to access my parking pad or whatever, or have my trash picked up, right? All these things. So that's my second request is within those citations, what's the balance between ones that are driven by, that are directly tied to a 311 request and ones that are from some other means, presumably proactive enforcement?
Thank you, Councilman Parker. I wanted to ask one last question. Did you get these two requests clear?
I thought that was a question. Was it a question or was it a statement?
Those are two requests. I'm grateful to have you respond to those, but I mean, it's really the numbers behind it that I'm looking for. So one being the responsiveness, the response time to 311 calls for the specific types of requests that are made, that are called in. And the other is within the overall citations on a month-to-month basis, what the balance has been between ones driven by a 311 request versus resulting from some other kind of action. But I'm always glad to hear your thoughts on it.
That was just my question. Was it a question or was it?
Yeah, we want to get written reports on this.
That was my question. Did you just want a written response or? Okay,
when you go into the parking complaint service request, you end up in a drop-down menu that breaks it into, I'm complaining about this type of parking infraction. What we'd like to see is each of those parsed out and what is our response time to each of those different types of like subcategories from the drop-down menu. And we obviously had about 3 weeks of no enforcement starting from late January. Perhaps it would make sense to look at this for a month leading up to that date, and maybe for, again, like a second report, if we could get that soon in the next 2 weeks, and then from whenever we resumed parking enforcement for the next month, so we can look at 1 month in the past and 1 month that is essentially current right now. And then
the second request around 311 driven citations versus non-311 driven citations. I think that same chart, I think you had however many months, it was like 16 months or so. That same one just broken down in those two categories would be great.
Councilwoman Porter, thank you for being here today. How are you doing today? Okay, I want to ask one last question about Pittsburgh, because in the letter that we sent on December 23rd, we asked how many people are going to Pittsburgh and for how long and at what cost. Do you have that information? Not just how many people, but who are going, and wondering if it's only DOT staff that's going.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again?
Going to Pittsburgh. Who? For how long?
Great question.
What's the cost to taxpayers?
All right, so as of right now, as I mentioned, our tentative dates are either April 9th or 10th. It's going to be roughly 12 individuals. It'll be staff from the mayor's office, staff from DOT, staff from the parking authority, and staff from BSID.
Okay.
We have the only thing we have locked down is potential dates, who's going, and the outline. We do not have any financial information as of yet because we haven't booked anything, but I can be transparent as of what we were planning for in January.
If you could just follow up with just like the names of everybody that's going and what the dates are going to be.
Oh, we can do that.
Let's do that.
We had that, no, I already committed to that.
You already have
We
that.
have that information already
All right,
available.
send that to us after this meeting today.
Got it.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Councilwoman Middleton.
Thank you. I guess this discussion and question goes along with what we have been talking about as far as parking enforcement. I noticed that there, and I don't know if this is happening in other districts, but there seems to be an uptick in parking problems around churches and their services, and particularly along, there's areas in Howard Park and there's areas on Park Heights Avenue. And you know that there's a lot of churches on Park Heights Avenue and on the side streets. And I've been starting to get complaints about the churches actually blocking the streets. And, you know, a lot of these streets are narrow streets, blocking the streets with cars, having church service, homeowners not being able to, you know, park on the street, just all kinds of things are starting to come up just around church service. And just during the week, there might be revivals that are kind of starting up. Are there plans, or how do you handle that? I mean, do you wait until someone calls into 311, or do you, for me, it seems like maybe someone needs to start riding around on certain days just to see if, you know, people are supposed to be, you know, following the rules. I noticed there's even old signage on streets that probably needs to be removed. There might be bus stops that need to be moved further up by corners. So I guess my question is a combination of things that are happening because of church service and also development. And just, are you on the forefront of how you're working, or are you working with communities with this issue?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Council Vice President. I would start by saying that, I mean, if these things are not reported to us, like it's difficult for us to honestly know. If it's coming in by way of your office, we would certainly, you know, take direction and immediately go out and check these things. We would also obviously tell constituents to please call and reach out to 311 if they're seeing these things, and just provide detailed information as to where it's happening. I would note, as far as like bus stop situations, if those stops need to be moved, we, you know, can provide the appropriate connection to someone at MTA. They have to do a study or inventory as to if they need or see fit to move their bus stops and things like that. We could also do an inventory to see if there are old signs in neighborhoods that are not relevant anymore, or if the signs need to be replaced. But I will realistically say the resources that it would take to come citywide and patrol neighborhoods for people blocking streets or that are non-permitted and things like that, it would directly take away from broader enforcement, for broader parking enforcement. Like if we are out looking for abandoned vehicles, or if we're out doing our general parking enforcement in other parts of the city, or even in that specific area that, you know, your district in general, we're broadly doing parking enforcement in your district, but we were to have to hyper-focus on a series of a couple blocks. Not to say that we wouldn't, but it would be helpful if we were told ahead of time that these folks are inappropriately parking. And that could be something as simple as us having someone from our right-of-way division to say, like, you don't own the right-of-way, you can't come over here and take the street. You don't have a permit to utilize the street for this amount of time, for this day, or something to that effect.
Thank you. Yeah, I do have some 311 numbers that have, I guess, been ignored, and that's how they end up sending things to me.
Yeah, I mean, I would be happy to ask that if you have them, you can certainly send them to my team, Luciano, myself, and we can make sure that they're elevated and taken care of appropriately.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. To my right, Councilman Porter, Councilman Bullock, Councilman Gray, anything here on parking enforcement? Okay, then I want to move on. Yeah. Councilman Gray.
I just wanted to take a point, I guess a privilege, just to thank Christian and the folks in parking enforcement. We've been trying to do at least once a week or once every 2 weeks, a sweep of areas that we know that are areas where people chronically either park halfway on curbs or just illegally park in general. And it's proven to actually kind of change behaviors in certain areas, although after the snowstorm, I think everyone kind of forgot. And so it'll be picking up, and so will my emails. So I just want to take a point of order to just say thank you for that. But also just to check back in to see if there's any type of collaboration or if there's any capability, and maybe OPI could answer this question as well, to kind of take care of things that we hear a lot in our offices. For instance, recycling or trash pickup. They're unable to do so DPW because someone's blocking the alley. And so DPW just skips over it. We will call in, of course, by the time they get there, that person's at work or they're just not there. Is there any type of way that we can kind of, work hand in hand? Is there anything that we can do when, let's say, an alley is blocked, that's reported, and then proactively, because you guys don't have the capacity just to go around to every alley before, a recycling or trash collection. But I think it would be helpful, and it would just show good faith for our neighbors if the day before or the night before, based on the information you received, either from 311 or just anecdotally from said trash DPW sanitation workers, if they 2 or 3 times out of 2 or 3 months, they can't pick up trash collection, someone's blocking the alley, to just go out proactively to give someone a ticket or citation to kind of change that behavior. Because what we're seeing now is they park in the alley, we have to put a sign up. We put the sign up, they still park in the alley. If you're able to come out, you can ticket them. But in the meantime, trash collection or recycling collection are just being ignored. And they're just not being picked up. And it becomes a problem now. You have to use more resources for people to come back out on a Saturday or another day to pick it up. And so if there's a way that we can work on that, or if you guys are already working on it, I would love to know. But to me, these are like those little small things that like folks just like, why can't we just fix this? We know this person's parking in the alley all the time. Why can't we just go ahead and give them a ticket, or at least make sure they're just not in the alley for trash pickup or recycling collection?
One thing that I'll say with respect to the Tiger team is we're focusing on these types of process type issues. So there is an opportunity to focus on a rapid response type model for these high priority situations where a vehicle may be obstructing an alley and disrupting an entire operation. So we'll take note of that to work with the teams to figure out a good way to tag certain priority parking complaints that may disrupt operations or quality of life otherwise, and fold that into the rapid response model. I also think that that is, that idea could go more broadly to coordinated activities like trash and recycling as well as street sweeping. And so so I appreciate the idea.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. We are going to go on to street lighting. Tony, let's pull up a few slides here. I'm going to run through a few slides here to get us back onto the topic here of street lighting. Just a basic expression of some priorities that have been thematic throughout all of our hearings in the past and follow-up discussion and information requests. In DOT's presentation today, there was a slide about determining ownership of assets in terms of like who maintains which streetlight, but I want to be clear that at like the highest 10,000 foot level, again, when we talk about goals and orientation of operations around a desired outcome here, I think the most important baseline related to street lighting is owning, that DOT owns the responsibility for street lighting, that the taxpayers, the citizens, the business operators, the residents, the guests of Baltimore expect of DOT to perform street lighting as a public good, a public service, and that we just need to be very clear at every aspect of our dealings with this, that DOT is the owner and driver of outcomes here. That we cannot continue to operate as owner of this responsibility if we do not have an actual contract with our service provider. We can't even imagine saying that we own the responsibility for street lighting if we can't say clearly we actually have a contract for the services that we rely upon to provide street lighting maintenance. That in owning this responsibility, that it needs to be as easy as possible, as streamlined as possible for the taxpayers to be able to request this service or expect that it's a well-maintained service, which is why there shouldn't be 7 different service request types that DOT responds to and expects members of the public to wade through 7 different service request types, that we need a single service request type that functions for anything that DOT could need to dispatch, triage, respond to related, and that we need to be able to properly inventory the parts to carry out this function of maintaining, operating street lighting in the city. DOT committed to providing a comprehensive list of knockdowns by November 2025. We had some hiccups in that. We have had what I think is a much improved and clearly understandable account that was more recently provided to us. Thank you for that. We have a number of confirmed knockdowns that are documented and have been actually physically investigated. And it says that, and that list tells us what parts are needed to restore each of those lights. But we also know that this list is not comprehensive, that it is very clear that there is a significant number of other knockdown streetlights throughout the city that are not accounted for in our comprehensive list of knockdowns. And so that is a gap, is a delta that needs to be addressed. And we heard in DOT slides that there is a process being undertaken about that. We're gonna have some questions about that in a moment, I think. And then, and that is this mismatches between the street view issue and essentially the GPS. We're referring to it as the BGE data, but what it is a GPS list of all the assets that we believe exist in the city. And that there will be some field inspections to investigate this. So to come back to this maintenance contract issue, we just need to be very clear. The city charter does not allow us to engage with any contractor or vendor for any sort of service. DOT can't do it any more than DPW can do it, or the health department, or DGS, or any other city agency. They're not allowed to pay money, let alone millions of dollars, in a very predictable manner to any vendor every single year or ever without there being an actual contract approved by the Board of Estimates. And I don't need to belabor this point, but aside from there being a contract that explicitly spells out what our terms are with engaging with this vendor, nothing else is sufficient as a replacement for that. We'll hear some more about the street lighting service requests as an issue here, but look, there are 8 of them. One of them is about park stuff, but 7 of these are things that DOT is directly responsible for. And we have this inventory of parts that was provided to us back in April of last year, again in October of last year, and then again just a couple of weeks ago, showing us what our inventory levels are for key parts and how much we've put this together, and we can see how this has changed over time. But essentially, we're a lot worse off than we were a year ago when we started talking about the importance of building our inventory in order to be able to meet needs. And it doesn't seem that we're on a path to real success in fixing this issue. So I'll stop there for now. And we'll go to the council president. He needs to leave pretty shortly, so we're going to start with him.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Grateful to DOT and the Law Department for their work in developing a draft contract for street lighting maintenance. As we discussed in the first hearing, and as the chair just reiterated, the handshake agreement that has been in place for decades is not serving Baltimoreans and does not uphold the requirements of the charter. I'm disappointed to hear that BGE doesn't appear to be interested in negotiations to formalize this relationship. To pick up on the chair's point, Director Macbeth, before we get into BG&E, let's just set the baseline really clear. Street lighting is a public good. Whose responsibility ultimately is it to provide street lighting?
I would say it's the city's responsibility to provide street lighting. I mean, for the safety's sake.
Great. So the city/DOT is ultimately who is responsible?
Yeah.
Okay. But we contract out the bulk of it to BG&E, but we should be directing and managing their work just like any other contractor, subcontractor, et cetera. Is that fair?
Fair, we contract out a portion.
Sorry.
I said fair, we contract out a portion, yes.
Right, but ultimately, I think
The onus is on us. That's
where I'm going here, kind of to the chair's premise, is that we need to own it. We need to be responsible for it. Just like any other vendor, any other subcontractor, ultimately, residents are going to hold us accountable, the city. And so just want to make sure that when we talk about the way we're subcontracting out, that we are ultimately taking responsibility for the end product of the work that gets done. Is that?
Yes, I mean, I will say BGE has their role. I mean, they do install some light poles and things like that. So we take responsibility in essence for the ones that we do and are installing. We maintain some of the things that they install, and if there's kind of some more nuanced questions, I can definitely have Damien and his team provide some more nuance to the kind of intermingling of BG&E and DOT as far as the installation and maintenance components. But we install and maintain the city lights, but BGE does install and maintain some of theirs as well. The overlap is that if there's a damaged street light, we take care of all of them, both city and BG&E.
Right. Ultimately, though, the charter requires us to maintain streetlights. My understanding of the conversation with BG&E is that there has been some breakdown. If BG&E is not willing to come to the table with us will DOT step in and pursue our own means of maintaining our lights? I do not believe that any vendor, no matter how small or large, should dictate the way an agency performs.
And I understand that. I mean, we obviously will have to like step in and continue to maintain our lights and the structures associated with it.
If BGE isn't willing to enter into an agreement, an enforceable contract, not just handshake agreement that complies with our charter, should we not seek out a different vendor? Should we not seek out a different remedy in order to get our streetlights fixed?
Yes, if they are unable or unwilling to, it's on, sorry. I maybe just not speaking into it enough. I feel like it's too much now. Yes, if they're unable or unwilling to work with us on this matter, we will have to pivot and find an alternative avenue to accomplish the desired outcomes.
Understood. And again, my understanding is that right now, there's not.
We've not been able to make significant traction. I don't want to say that there's not been any, it's not complete obstinance. I don't want to portray that, but we have not been able to make significant headway either.
Understood. I think just to the general premise here, ultimately, if they do not come to the table, if we cannot structure a deal, an agreement with them, it is this council and this committee's expectation that we will either seek a different vendor or bring said work in-house, because at the end of the day, our residents deserve their streetlights to be repaired in an expeditious time.
Correct. We'll have to work through what that would look like and how that can be accomplished. Yes.
Okay.
Without them being a part of the process.
Last question here. My understanding is that BGE subcontracts the entirety of their work. Is that you all's understanding as well?
Yes, sir. They subcontracted out to a few vendors that they have.
Okay.
The main one for us is like Riggs.
Is who?
Riggs. That company does a lot of the work that they provide in the city of Baltimore.
Understood. I just want to close and pass back to the chair, but I would just say that those same contractors could be managed directly by DOT or by some other contractor who is more willing to align with us and with the city's charter. Is that fair?
We would have to look at if that company would be willing, if it went to that route that you're saying, City Council President, saying that BG is out of the picture and now other companies have the opportunity to bid on the contract.
Yeah, understood.
If it goes that route.
Yeah, appreciate that. I think, again, where I want to just land the plane here is if we are dealing with a vendor, a contractor that is in fact subcontracting out its work, does there come a point if that vendor is unwilling to work with us where we just cut out the middleman and work with their subs or work with any other willing partner?
If they bid on the contract, yes, sir. If that's the route that we end up taking, it's open for everybody to bid on it, and the selected bidder would be doing the work.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and just appreciate, Director, the clear willingness to own all of it, that ultimately it's going to fall on the mayor, the city council, the Department of Transportation. And so we got to manage and navigate relationships with contractors, subcontractors, and ultimately be accountable for the outcomes of the work. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. If I could put one kind of fine point on this and make a request, it's if we acknowledge that there is, look, every day that we continue our relationship in its current status with BGE is a day that we are actively participating in violating the city charter. And there has to be a question of like, how many days will we continue to do that before we at least are able to say, okay, this is the point at which we spend the next 30 days or 60 days figuring out who other potential primary contractors are that we could replace BGE with and put out an RFP for contracting street lighting maintenance. I guess my question here is, what is our drop dead date, right? That's not, we're cutting off our relationship with BGE on this date, but that we're saying enough is enough. They haven't clearly indicated that they're working with us. We need to begin to explore seriously alternative vendors. What's our date for saying that?
I think that's a tough question. I think there's a lot of implications in association with having a drop dead date as far as that goes. I know Webster has been working with them, and it's been a little bit quiet at their end. I think we can commit to continuing to reach out to them. If we are not getting any traction with reaching out to them, including with me reaching out to them, I am prepared to, elevate it to my leadership, the deputy mayor and the CA, and see what they say about it. I mean, unfortunately, I can't commit to a date at this time.
Okay, we have Graham Young here behind you from the mayor's office. I want to ask Graham specifically to come back to us and say, what does the mayor's office think is an acceptable length of time for this to continue to go on without BGE coming to the table? If the mayor's office could please follow up with the committee and say, look, if BGE is not clearly indicating to us that they're playing ball with us by X date, we are going to take necessary measures to find an alternative to BGE as our streetlight maintenance provider. I'm going to go back to the council president real quick.
Just want to close out this point. I think it's been a focus of this council and for me personally on the Board of Estimates, trying to understand our relationships with contractors, with subcontractors. We as a city do a lot of contracting out of work that has at times historically been the function of the city. And so one of my goals is any of these contracts that we have, whether it's, again, with a large or small vendor, whether it's the contractor or the subcontractor, is what is the overall efficacy? Or is the taxpayer getting their bang for their buck? If we are taking a service that at one point may have been in-house, that may have provided a job to a Baltimore City worker and is now contracted, and in this case, subcontracted out, what is the value for our residents? And so I think the push from myself, the chair, the committee on this is really about our ability to evaluate every contract that we have. And when we see a vendor that in this case seems like they are not working with us, do we need to reevaluate? What are our options as a city? How do we move in a way that honors our commitment to the charter, which is to fix the streetlights, while making sure we're getting the best bang for our buck to the residents? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. President. Councilman Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm really excited to hear that DOT and OPR are undertaking a data-driven approach to identify a comprehensive list of knockdowns. We all know in order to fix them all, we have to first identify exactly where they are. in my district, there is one light that we've been trying to fix for maybe like the last year. And it's just a point of contention between BG&E and DOT. BG&E map shows that it's a DOT light. DOT tells us it's a BG&E light. This light continues to sit in the alley, not being maintenance. When there were 3 or 4 of them, BG&E did them all except for this one light because they said it's not theirs. But moreover, when you go on the BG&E map, it shows 2 lights in this particular location, one that isn't labeled anymore and the other one that is. And that kind of just highlights the issue that we're seeing. And if constituents go in there and they have trouble because even as an office, and we're supposed to know more more about this process than our constituents, if we're having trouble trying to navigate this fix, I can only imagine how hard it is for everyday residents who are just trying to work, go home, and feel safe when they take their trash out at night. So on that point, ultimately, as you said, Director Macbeth, it is the city's responsibility to provide street lighting to residents and not BG&E's or any other party. So regardless who maintains any given light, the city needs to know where all these are and which ones are broken at any given time. So when will DOT provide the number of mismatches between Cyclomedia's Street View imagery and BG&E's data? Because that will give us a ceiling on the number of knockdown street lights we have in total throughout the city.
Sorry, that's a good question. I am going to refer to my data folks to kind of give you a bit of an update regarding the connectivity between Cyclomedia, the actual inventory by going out to the street themselves, and then also BGE's data. So I'd like to start with Webster, if that's okay, and then Webster, if you have anything, or if you don't cover everything and D'Artagnan has anything additional to offer, fine, but Webster, if you can start off.
Yes, so, thank you, Director. So we are essentially trying to solve a bivariate problem using geospatial data. And while, we do have the geocoded data sets from BG&E, and we are utilizing the Cyclomedia imagery data set as an overlay for both data sets, which thanks to BG&E, we also have ownership codes, and we're able to establish the delta there. It is very early because what we're utilizing to solve this problem is buffers between data sets that are owned by the city versus those that are owned by BG&E. It's very early because we have to establish buffer zones that either shrinks that delta between both data sets, or it also increases that data set. So it's very early for us to be able to provide a data set to you that says, hey, this is the delta between what's missing from Cyclomedia or what's missing from BG&E.
So you said it's very early. In the process, if we're going to 100%, are we 15, 25, 30, 50% into the process? Early leaves a lot of room for error. Like we can be here 10 years from now and you're saying we're halfway through.
So it's iterative in the sense that when we do a one-to-one overlay between both data sets, the delta is, is higher. And we are looking at introducing other data sets, for example, private land ownership as a measure, which shrinks that initial delta from 11,000 to 4,000. And the delta needs to be something that we're comfortable with, or something that makes sense and something that's rational enough for us to put a team together to have our team inspect those locations. So again, it's early in the sense that we're working through introducing a multitude of data sets and connecting those to make sure that we have a stable enough of a number that makes sense and is applicable for inspections.
And Webster, if I can add one thing, I do want to echo the point of us wanting to have a quality inventory that both the public and our public servants can depend on. And so we have partnered with DOT to lift up some of the work that they've been doing with BG&E. We've gotten to a point where we have done the analysis with the BGE data set as well as our own data, and we've narrowed it down to 4,600 mismatches. So that's where we are right now. Now, to Webster's point, we're doing more with GIS so that we can reduce the mismatches. We think that we can reduce that by about half. Now, when we get to that point, though, that will require inspectors to go out to the sites where we have not been able to verify a match and then look at those. One of the recommendations of this work will be to work with DOT to assemble humans that can go out and visually inspect those gaps, which are 4,600 now, that we believe we will be able to cut in half. So that means that humans will need to inspect about 2,000 streetlights. And after that, we want to publish that as a final vetted inventory that will maintain once and for all. Let me know if you have any questions about that.
Yeah, I guess I'll probably get the same response to my follow-up question, which is, once that number is determined and we go through that process, do you have anticipated time or when do you expect it to take, as you said, to complete the field surveys to truly have a comprehensive inventory of the knockdown streetlights? I think you kind of said so in that last part of what you said, but if you can just go in a little deeper.
That's correct. So where we are now is we have the 4,600 mismatches, so we've gotten it down. We believe within the next month we'll be able to get to the half of that. But what happens after that, which is the field inspections for which people will have to go out to address any mismatches, we really would need to partner with DOT to understand what that deployment would look like. So if that's staff, if it's contractors, if it's a group of volunteers, we would really need to work with our partners in DOT to determine what that activation would look like and when it would occur. So I could defer back to my partners over in DOT for input on that, and it may turn into a committee follow-up.
Okay, and I will give my follow-up privileges to Councilwoman Porter.
All right, so just to be clear, so we've got a range here of what that delta can be. BGE says there's a bunch of lights. Cyclomedia says, actually, there aren't so many lights. That gap is what we believe likely to be missing street lights. We're going to use technology to get that down to a smaller, more manageable number, and then we're going to deploy some system of doing investigations, whether that's sending people to each individual one, whether that's, I don't know, hovering a drone over to look to see whether there's a light there, whatever it is, we're going to get, do we know when we're going to have a plan, a strategy for that investigation level? Just in our meeting last week, we did a prep meeting for this. Deputy CAO Zaid said, you know, I think the takeaway from him was, look, if it's 1,000, then maybe we do this in-house. If it's 5,000, maybe we get a contractor to do this. And what we're hearing from D'Artagnan is, right now it's looking like 4,600, but maybe it's half of that and when you talk about the fencing, you're talking about basically like, we're gonna isolate ones that Cyclomedia just can't see because maybe they're in an alley or something like that, and reduce this to the ones that are along streets where we expect there to be a street light that Cyclomedia could and should see. And so that's what our geofencing and mapping will allow us to reduce this to. And so it sounds like there's probably going to be 2,400 of these. So it's somewhere in between that 1,000 and 5,000 in-house versus contractor. When can we figure out, like, if we can say that this is probably 2,500 lights, when are we going to have a strategy for investigating?
I would say that this would be a project that would probably be negotiated sometime between spring and summer, realistically. So
Spring and summer of this year?
Yeah.
Yeah, so by mid-year, we'll have a plan.
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to go to Councilman Parker. Is that what we're doing? Yeah. Okay. So you're going to ask some questions about steel bases.
Thank you, Councilperson Dorsey, Chair Dorsey, for jogging my memory about my deep fascination with steel bases. I actually do. That's only partially untrue. So I noticed in the presentation that you all gave an update on the steel-based orders. I know that was also part of the committee request, and so was included more detail in the memo. So just to spend a little more time on that side of it, I know it's been one of the main holdups as trying to get these things addressed. Is it true that we still haven't received this initial order? Are they?
Yes, Councilman, it is true. We have a expected delivery date of the first 125 by the end of April.
Okay, by the end of April?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So according to DOT's own records, we need at least 279 steel bases to meet our need, likely significantly more than that. As of last month, we had 9 in stock. The plan's to order 500 over 2 years. Is that right?
So each year right now, the contract is 250 bases every year for the next 4 years. We have been working with our procurement division, and we're looking into getting another company that supplies steel pole bases. So we won't just have the one company. We'll have multiple companies that we can get these bases from.
I understand. So when you say it's 250 a year, that's our goal. We don't have a contract specifically with that one vendor. We're exploring other options as well to achieve that number?
Yes. So with the one company we have right now set up for 250 bases, so we've already put in for the other 125 to be delivered because we know it's a 12 to 16 week lead time.
Yep.
So we just want to make sure that we stay on top of getting our inventory in the meantime, also working with procurement and looking at other options to get more steel pole bases in.
On that last point then, where do other cities procure theirs? I mean, do you have some sense of the landscape of vendors and if other cities are having a really productive relationship with a different company?
No, only thing I can say is I know on this particular bid, we had four other vendors that did bid on it, but of course the lowest bid did receive it. So there is other manufacturers out there that do supply steel pole bases.
Okay.
One thing quickly I want to note is that we're working with Adam Manny, the Director of Procurement, to look at other resources of ways that we can procure these type of things just in a broad way. I know oftentimes they're relegated to procurement processes in our agencies and not being able to look at other more unique ways of sourcing products or things like that. So we are working with him to figure out maybe some alternative ways to try to do like a cooperative contract or things like that to source these particular items.
Okay. So the committee was told by the department that the first shipment basis was going to be in by January 25th, but you just mentioned an April date. Did something happen in between those two between today and that communication around January 25th?
Yes, the vendor did not have them. They had to get them manufactured.
Okay. So it's our understanding that when a vendor is not performing as expected, there is a process set up by procurement directors, you were saying, to keep them in the loop and inform future procurement decisions. So even though recognizing this was the low bid, in light of their inability to, lack of communication and their inability to deliver what has been promised in a timely fashion, within the existing procurement system, is there a way for us to secure maybe a higher priced but more responsive vendor?
Since I'm not the procurement specialist, I would direct that question to Mr. Adam Mann team to speak more in depth to that.
Okay. Has DOT to this point submitted the unsatisfactory supplier performance report maintained by procurement?
Well, because we had a conversation with Mr. Adam Mann, the company became very responsive today. That day we had that conversation by giving us a date that when we would receive the material, which hadn't been before. They even put it on their company letterhead, and because they did reply, they were still in the range. If they had not replied at that time, then we were doing, I forgot what the letter was to the company.
A curing letter.
A curing letter,
Yeah,
but
so we
because
did issue a curing letter, and so as such, that allows us to work to try to find other vendors. So just like we said, so yeah.
Okay, thank you. Director Macbeth, what's the last time we had an active contract for the delivery of 48-inch steel bases? Or, I mean, whoever is
Yeah, I
best
would
to,
defer that to Damien. The last time we've had an active contract for these steel bases.
For 48-inch steel bases?
For 48-inch,
Yeah.
before I took over the job, so I would say probably about 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay. What's the current inventory of those?
Of the 48?
Yeah.
That's what we have coming in.
Pull up that slide.
So it's very low.
Okay.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah. Here's a slide on that.
Shows 9.
Sub-base, so it's in the bottom third of the page here, sub-base 48. So there's one that has a 1-inch plate that sits on at the surface level of the road, and there's one that has a 5/8 inch plate. And, you know, a year ago, we had 24 of the 1-inch, which was in the in our higher demand category, I guess. And now we're down to 9. We have hundreds of lights that need these, right?
Correct.
We have 574 of the 5/8 one, but we have 279 lights that need this right now, that need the 1-inch right now.
They need the 1-inch.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, DOT. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to ask a couple questions similarly about poles. Can we just keep that slide up there? We have 9 steel bases, and we need at least 279 right now. Similarly, we had 3 11.5-foot poles in stock as of last month, and right now we need 45 of them. We had 2 30-foot poles in stock as of last month and need at least 163. And again, I give these numbers with the caveat that these are the ones that are documented and that we have clearly a delta. I mean, our documentation says we have 400 some knockdown streetlights, but our comparison of the GPS data and the cyclomedia data says it's something probably more like 2,500. So we probably have 2,000 more streetlights knocked down throughout the city. So these numbers are probably significantly higher, but our documented need for 11.5 is 45, and our documented need for 30-foot is 163, where we have 2 and 3 of the respective poles. How are these, what's our plan to restore inventory level for these? Do we have a contract for these?
No, we're in the process of working with Mr. Mann's team to get a contract for these poles.
If I look at our inventory, a year ago, April of 25, we had 175. And in the last year, we've allowed this to go down to 3. We had a year to not get to 3 for the 11.5. And a year ago, we had only 49, which should have, I would think, be maybe they went up. I mean, because it says in October we had 50. Did we get some 30-foot poles last year?
Yes, sir. We did 719 locations from when we started meeting. So we get them in, they go out. We get them in, they go out.
So we actually got in a large quantity of 30-foot poles last year?
Yes.
And installed a lot of, all right, but we're still down to 2 now.
Yes, I'm sorry.
What is our system improvement here so that we're not getting down to 2 and 3 of these critical
So again,
needs
it goes
parts?
back to the procurement process. So we're working to get other vendors to make sure that we have multiple suppliers. So a lot of this is an unbundling process. Like, as you know, like in many agencies, you're relegated to lowest bidders, right? So this is like trying to unbundle the process through our procurement office to make sure that we are able to move forward with a variety of procurement options, essentially just making sure that we have the capacity through a cooperative ability, and we can get to the point where we need to, where we can have multiple options as far as vendors to get these poles from, and we're not, I don't want to say stuck, but for lack of a better word, being stuck with a singular vendor and having to wait till they have the inventory in stock, just like how you see that our original delivery date was for January, and then they didn't have the inventory, and then it gets pushed back to April, and then we have no choice but to do what? Wait.
So essentially, we need to get to a place where we can have multiple contracts with multiple vendors, which is basically impossible if we're primarily stuck to the low bid standard, where
Right, which is-
we have to advertise a need, get the responses, and then can only award to the one of them that is the lowest bid, despite whether that lowest bid is able to fully meet our needs.
Right, which is, like I said, while we're working with Adam's team to make sure that we have an opportunity to look at cooperative bidding opportunities where we can get more vendors and suppliers to do just that, so that we're not stuck to a singular bid opportunity.
All right, I'll take a tangent here for just 1 second and note that I also, aside from this committee, chair a committee on review of the charter, and that we have determined some things that we think are reasonable next priorities for charter amendments, and among the highest priorities there is taking out of the charter some overly restrictive strangleholds that it has on procurement process. This is a perfect example of how our
Absolutely.
charter is getting in the way of us conducting business in the interest of the taxpayers. I had a couple other questions, but about pole inventory, but I think that you've really illustrated the core of the problem here. It doesn't sound to me like you're necessarily lacking in awareness of potential suppliers. You're just stuck in a system that doesn't allow you to utilize those vendors to get us what we need. I want to stress, who's Adam? Adam who?
Adam Manny is the Director of Procurement.
Okay, I want to stress to Adam the need to get DOT through this hiccup. That's an understatement, hiccup, but to get through this so that we are not stuck here, unable to provide a basic service. I'm going to go to Councilwoman Middleton in just a moment. I want to ask about this one other issue, coming back to the street lighting SR. Can we pull up the slide that DOT provided on this? The one you just had, yes. This is an envisioning of a different way from what happens right now, right? Right now, what's at the top is essentially representative of a very generic category that exists, streetlight issues or whatever. And then everything else is, the 6 under it are other categories that are just more specific things. This looks to me like a system for allowing a person to go into one SR category and then in the course of asking other questions, be told, oh, we need to bump you into this other SR category, rather than using a drop-down menu in that SR category to just say, you have a streetlight issue? Tell us what that issue is, and we will triage what that issue is because we are responsible for maintaining the streetlights. I want to be clear that I don't think it is the average citizen's job to triage the issue of a specific street lighting problem. We shouldn't even expect that of them. We should elicit some level of information from them, but it is DOT's job as the owner of the responsibility to provide street lighting as a public good, to do the triage, to do the investigation, and to do the production of a work order to remedy the problem. Is that a fair summary?
No, it's not on the citizen, it's on us. I would encourage Samantha, if you don't mind, to speak more on the 311 component.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so
Thank you.
100% agree with you, and I think this is a broader concept from the 311 process today. We need to be asking the resident what the problem is and then allowing the system to determine where that work needs to go based on the problem they've described for the next step. And so we're in the process of working with DOT to understand, today there are 10 street lighting SRs, and of those 10, they can go in 4 different directions based on how the resident puts it in, and we want to change the dynamic exactly as you've described to say, we need to determine the right questions to ask to get to the next step, but simplify the process for the resident to input something, allow the system to take that information and take it to the next spot, which is not them picking the right thing, it's them describing the problem to us and allowing it to route properly. So we are looking at the requirements and what we need to ask up front to determine that next step so that we can flow that. It's a fundamental shift for how the system is designed today. So we're doing some work in the back end, and I know we have time next week to walk through that with you separately with the Salesforce administration team to kind of show you how that's going to work. But this is not the forcing them a different direction. This is actually just doing it on the backside so that it's clean for the resident, because they don't need to choose what the right SR type is. They need to just tell us what the problem is.
Yeah, that's right. I appreciate that.
Yep.
And at a, I think, fundamental, like, process management, internal process management level, if I look at this, what this, you know, like, if it were possible to push somebody into any of 6 different SR categories, then that's 6 different SR categories that somebody at DOT needs to monitor as they come in. And that sounds to me a lot more likely to run into trouble than somebody at DOT monitoring one SR category that can have variations within it so that they can go, this one is reporting this kind of problem. Let's send the right person out to go investigate that kind of problem. They don't need 6 different SR categories coming in their stream in order to be able to do that. Okay, good. I think we're on the same page about the kind of progress that needs to be made there, and I'm happy to see that some progress has been made, even to be able to demonstrate what this looks like, even since last week. Councilwoman Middleton.
Mr. Chair, I just want to add, I guess, I just know firsthand, as far as with the polls, I know that DOT has been looking at communities that have polls that were in trouble, really, in the whole surrounding community. And because of this shortage, they figured out ways to remove all of those poles and try to replace them with better poles. And then taking some of those old poles and using them somewhere else that has a similar design. So they have been forward thinking in how to stretch what they have of good poles, if I explain that correctly. I don't know if you want to explain that idea, or did I go through it right?
Yeah, yes, you have, Councilwoman. So what has taken place is, and one of the projects we did is in Councilwoman's Middleton area, we had the old Inner Harbor poles, which they are the poles that are downtown. So the ones that were bad downtown, we were able to exchange them out as we were replacing poles in your area. So we are trying to do the best that we can with the inventory we have to make sure that we can decrease a light shortage when we can do it.
And that community was scared at first to accept this because, you know, people hate change, but once they saw the look, it was like very good reviews. So I just wanted the committee to know that that was some forward thinking that DOT had been working on. So thank you.
I love positive appreciation. Okay, I want to time check here. It is 11:25. We have one other topic that we got to get to. Do we have a burning desire from any of the other committee members on street lighting that we're going to hit on real quick before we go on to the last topic here? Councilman Blanchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just because Councilwoman Middleton mentioned how important the look of good street lighting is, the committee chair asked me not to bring it up, but just know that one day we're going to have this process fixed and figured out, and the functioning of street lights is going to be good, and then I will ask you guys to make the street lights prettier because it matters, especially on our main streets. It's a serious thing. But just know that, God willing, at some point in this term, I will bring that up to you. So,
yeah,
we don't disagree, and it matters in the neighborhoods that aren't main streets either. I'll tell you.
I think
my street lights have seen better days. Mine look like, I imagine what they look like in the 40s, but they work.
I think the phrase that Councilman Blanchard used in discussing this with me was the scourge that is Cobra Head street lighting. That, what I said is that, yeah, we're going to come back to this issue at some point of discussing the ability to swap out Cobra Head street lighting for pedestrian style street lighting. And talk about how we can adequately meet our needs in doing so.
Understood.
Okay, let's go back to my couple of intro slides here real quick on community engagement real quick, and then we'll wrap up with this topic. DOT committed to sharing community engagement protocols and timelines with the committee by project type no later than April 6th of 2025. The committee received SOPs that don't really do that on December 9th. And we have essentially two major things missing from these SOPs at this point. Ones that tie them to a project matrix, which is these timelines that we were supposed to get last April, and ones that tie our practices to effectiveness in reaching everybody that we think we need to be able to reach in order to say that our community engagement is effective and responsive. That's my whole slide. That's my one slide on this issue here. I'm going to go to the council president.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director Macbeth, as I mentioned in my opening, I'm glad that DOT has developed SOPs for community engagement for the first time in recent memory. However, I wanted to follow up on the community engagement matrix the chair just mentioned, which I know is a priority for me and this committee. And I'm going to channel a little bit of the VP Emeritus over here in saying, a clear accounting of community engagement steps and timelines is essential for the council if we are to support the department, and particularly if we're to support you in making hard decisions. I think one of the things you should pay attention to when you go to Pittsburgh is, when I went there, what stood out to me was that for big capital projects, for bike lanes, street repairs, anything that's gonna alter streets, it's not just DOT, their DOT that goes out, it's actually the mayor's team, the community engagement team that does the community work. I think this is an area where we, Baltimore, have really struggled, is how do we communicate internally, how do we then communicate to folks on the council, and then ultimately, how do we communicate to residents in a way that holds integrity all the way around? And I will just say that residents reach out to the council with concerns about projects and concerns about process all the time, and we need something to be able to point to, because so much of our job is about managing expectations that our constituents rightly have of local government. The chair asked you for this matrix specifically at the first hearing on March 6, 2025. You requested 2.5 weeks. Chair, we went back and forth. Chair said a month. My staff followed up in writing to emphasize the importance of the document to the committee and the council on January 21st. We're now 10 months out, beyond when it was originally promised. We have to hit deadlines. When will the committee receive these matrix?
In reference to the matrix for community engagement, the agency has been working on it with all of the divisions.
I apologize. Could you just
Hi,
state your
I'm
name for the record, your name and
Hi,
title?
I'm Aegis Guy, the Deputy Chief of Community Engagement for DOT. And some of these acts were there before I was in this division. So I have received the acts. I have started the written document that is the draft of the community engagement SOP. I have revised, re-implemented, and asked other divisions within our agency to look over what's been there and encompassed of it. So now we have to, within ourselves, make sure that we can meet the expectations of what Complete Streets asks and what we can also implement with the tools that we have to make sure that we can meet any acts that's asked for community engagement. So I'm asking that we can have time to make sure that we can earn it out completely, because along with the matrix, we've also asked that it also maintains Complete Streets as well.
Okay. And I appreciate that and glad that you are here and working on it. I think where I'm struggling here is this has been a request of this committee and frankly of the city council for years. These types of projects invoke a lot of strong feelings among residents. Folks are excited, anxious, frustrated, all the rest. If we can't manage expectations, if we can't be clear about what DOT is going to communicate, when, timelines, it really puts city government at a disadvantage at a moment where trust in government generally and public institutions generally is really at a deficit. And so I think the reason this committee has been stressing, and again, the VP Emeritus has been stressing the need for clear metrics, for clear communicable timelines for community outreach, and for like a process that we all follow and adhere to, is because ultimately it lands on council members, the mayor, all of us. When we face our constituents, they rightly want to know what is the process. And so I hear you saying you're relatively new to this role or to developing these criteria. I guess, Director, I'm going to come back to you for a moment and ask, when will the committee receive this, and I want to be respectful and provide as much ample time as possible, given that this has been an ongoing conversation with the department. I want to get a little more clear and specific about when this deliverable will be delivered to this committee.
So I'll start with the SOPs. We have draft SOPs that we can share. Patrick, and what timeline do you think? We can share the draft SOPs within 2 weeks. The caveat is the fact that the matrix was added in correlation to the Complete Streets guidelines that was requested. That is the thing that is taking some time to incorporate the Complete Streets guidelines throughout every section of the SOPs. So our planning department, Sean is taking lead on that, is working with Asia, our deputy chief for community engagement, and they are working in incorporating the matrix components into the SOP document. So in 2 weeks, we can give you the SOP draft. And as far as the matrix component, they are still working on that. So I don't want to provide an exact number for the matrix component because I'm not sure as far as how far along they are. But Sean, if you have some more determinants, please chime in.
Sure. I do just want to I want to delineate the SOP from this matrix piece.
Yep.
The SOP, which is in kind of the later stages of refinement and development, is necessary to establish before we start talking about what a future matrix that would encompass all different varietals of every single project. The SOP will serve as the blueprint for these, and then the matrix can be utilized to enhance that transparency. But the matrix that exists within the Complete Streets ordinance at current is not in itself an SOP. It is a list of certain things that could be done with a smaller subset of projects that the agency is responsible for. So when we talk about the SOP, I think it's going to require review and approval from not only agency leadership and city leadership, but also council leadership before we start really pulling it through the fine mesh of what a specific SOP would look like for each project varietal.
Okay.
Can I intervene here for a second?
Yeah, I'm going to have the chair intervene, and then I'm going to jump back in on this.
The requirement of the matrix in the Complete Streets law is that it show all phases of all project types. And some phases of some project types are community engagement. And it would seem perfectly logical to me then that our SOPs for community engagement would say, this is the form of engagement we do and how we do it when we are in this category of phase. And I think we all have a pretty basic and reasonable understanding of we do things at project conception stage and 15% and 65% and just before construction. That I don't know if there are more than those four generally for a long multi-phase project. Maybe there are some smaller scale or lesser scope projects that are more specialized where we only do one thing or two things, but it would seem perfectly reasonable to me that our SOPs should be expressed in the form of this is what we do when we're doing this phase of engagement, and that phase of engagement could apply to any of a whole long list of a number of different types of projects, and that it shouldn't vary if it's 15% design engagement in project type A versus 15% engagement in project type B, C, or F, right? That this is the kind of standard that we're looking for. What is our SOP for conducting engagement at this kind of phase? And as we'll talk about, how do we measure its success?
So, I mean, I don't disagree with you. I definitely think the whole purpose and goal of the SOP is to address the community engagement issues and that it will in fact resolve the challenges that we have seen in community engagement, not just like in the actual neighborhood components, but with what we've seen with council, right? Like some of the gaps in communications that we've had and things like that. So I recognize that. I concur with Sean in aspects that the matrix is, I would say, a supplementary document. I don't think it is, you know, an inclusionary document that it is going to be the exact thing that the SOP depends on. I think they're a supplement. It's a supplement to the SOP. So as stated before, we can get you a copy of the SOP in 2 weeks and we'll continue to work on the matrix.
I have a question, if that's okay. You know, the community engagement SOP ideally should be a document that kind of educates the public on what our community engagement methodology is or approach throughout the project delivery process. My question is, with the matrix requests, like what's the specific ask behind? And the reason I ask that question is because I want to make sure that we actually deliver on that request. I just want to get clarity.
I think to the Council President's point, this is about setting and delivering upon expectations. I don't want a person in my district or some other part of the city being able to come to me and say, DOT has got this project and they're coming to us and saying that they're going to do engagement on some date, and it's unclear to me what the next steps are in this project, where we are in the life of this project, or whatever. I want every member of the public to be able to say, DOT has identified a project, and according to this matrix, when they tell me we are at this phase in the project, I know that they've already gone through this step, this step, this step, and this step, and that these steps are what is to come, and that's how I contextualize the community engagement that I am being invited into right now.
No.
And then to be able to reasonably say, I know that the last time I went to a project that was at this phase and I was asked to engage with the department, that this is how that engagement occurred. And that if anybody asks me, hey, I'm Joe Schmo citizen, like, I got this message about like going to this DOT thing. Do you know what this is all about? I can go, yeah, this is a project that's at this phase, and this document over here says what DOT does with all projects in that phase. And that's why this matrix exists, so that everybody knows that we're on the same page about what it takes to get any project from start to finish. And the requirement is that we have a matrix that does that for all project types and expresses all phases.
And I'll just put a fine point on, to answer your question and to the chair's point here. I think what I've seen happen in practice, and I'll channel my days in District 1, is community associations and communities that are more used to getting what they want from government, and particularly from city government, will navigate community engagement differently from communities that have historically been disenfranchised by government and not received the kind of capital investments that big projects require. What ends up happening is, if the standard operating procedure, if the metrics, if any of it is fuzzy and unclear, you then get into a situation where people's expectations aren't clear. People are frustrated because they feel like what happened over there in that part of the district isn't happening over here. I think just having standardization is extremely important, because ultimately we want to be able to deliver on the things that we say we're going to do. and we want to be able to hear the voices of our residents and incorporate their understandings and feedbacks. But the process, I think, has to be clear and fair for everyone, or we will or there will be a lot of inequity and a lot of frustration among residents if they can't point to, this is what you told me, this is what you said you were going to do, this is what you said you were going to come talk to me, and that they have pathways to participate in that process, either through their elected representatives that are sitting here or themselves. So I think that's why, to me, this is really important. I don't want to belabor the point. It's been a long hearing, and I've appreciated so much of it. I do want to just nail down, we said 2 weeks on draft SOPs, and then we are working to develop specific matrix. Is there a time frame? Because again, the Complete Streets law passed several years ago. Is there an approximate time? Is there a time frame that we could get for when we can have a draft, Sean or others, of those matrix?
So I'm just gonna say again, like, I think, like, the primary focus, like I said, is the SOPs within the 2 weeks. And then I think for what's in the SOPs, I think you'll see a lot of the information that will end up in the matrix. That being said, I would like to just say, once we submit the SOPs and you take a look, just revisiting the timeline for the submittal of the matrix. It's not that we're not going to be working on it, but I think the challenge with that is to organize something behind, like, the project phase. Like, you have to have, like, the project scope, the scale, and it's not going to be just a single metric for every single project. Does that make sense?
It does. All right, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you, Director. Thank you, team. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'm getting the sense that Councilwoman Middleton wants to add something to this. We're getting long in the tooth here.
I guess just to kind of add, I just want to, I know it's difficult, and I just want to share this example because I know you were probably on the email, Green Spring.
Yeah, sure was.
So Green Spring Avenue, where Kennedy Krieger is, that leads into Druid Hill Park, part of that whole problem was, and I'm just guessing, so here we have Kennedy Krieger on one side of the street and homeowners on the other side of the street. And you sent notices out. You did mailings, you did a lot of things, and
We did mailings,
sometimes
we did door
people sometimes residents will ignore all of that, thinking it will go away. But of course, at the end of the day, the problem comes to the council person, and it's a small group of people, and they'll just keep it going. They'll go to the congressperson, they'll chastise me, and at the end of the day, they did have some responsibility and didn't do it. And in this particular case, I know because I tried to help get them to respond through Park Heights Renaissance because it was in their boundaries. So again, there were like 3 meetings that you had, and still they wouldn't budge or move until it actually was done, the project was done. And they still, I think, made out because you did not mess with their parking where their homes were. It was on the other side where it was where it's a bus stop and so on. And I think the convenience over 40 years of residents living there had that extra parking, and they have 2, 3, 4 cars, and they're just devastated. So I know I'm just sharing, I know there's other pieces that you're trying to put together, but in order for bike lanes and all of those things to move forward now that you're really starting to get into neighborhoods. We just have to think of reasons to get our residents to participate because it clearly is happening. So I just wanted to add that piece.
Thank you. We're in the home stretch here. We're gonna ask Councilman Blanchard, I think you have, no, okay. Anything from the right side of the room? Oh, I'm gonna bring up, sorry, Councilman Parker and I both wanted to bring up this issue of, we requested the orange cone list in the December 23rd letter. We asked DOT to give us the year's resurfacing plans for the year by February 12th. We haven't received any response to that request. I know that you've asked me what streets I want done at the neighborhood level, but let me emphasize that the more concerning thing here is the perennial problem of tech projects being unstated until well into the paving season, and that by the time that means that any work can be done at all, we're asking for the plans for how those tech projects will comply with the need to make multimodal changes and improvements, and whether or not any such plans exist or are compliant with those needs to make safety improvements and multimodal improvements. And this is why we ask every year to get this information at an early date. And I made an even stronger point of it this year by requesting it in December for February instead of January for March. I really want this information, and it's a perennial concern for every member of this city council to know at an early date what streets are going to be resurfaced, particularly under the tech program, and for us to have the plans for how those changes are going to be made. When can we get that tech list?
Hi, Luciano Diaz, Deputy Chief of Gov Relations for DOT. Hi, everyone. We don't have an exact date of when the complete list will be done. We have a deadline of this Friday for all council members submitted location requests. We're hoping to have a completed internal resurfacing list sometime in March, ideally earlier in the month. Once we have that, we'll be able to start completing the final orange cone list. Something we have run into with the orange cone list is the dichotomy between tech projects and internal resurfacing projects. Tech projects are contractual. They go through an annual procurement. They're done over the course of 2 years. So the progress on them can't really be compared to the progress on internal resurfacing, which is done in-house by DOT crews and is typically completed within the same construction season. So we've been trying to reimagine internally how we communicate the difference between these two to minimize the confusion, because in the same way that you can't really compare a rehabilitation project like 25th Street that's being reconstructed and streetscaped, we shouldn't be comparing very small scale resurfacing with what are essentially capital projects.
I totally agree. And based on everything that you just said, it's reasonable to say, hey, look, small scale internal resurfacing stuff, we might not know what those little neighborhood streets are going to be until the end of March, fine. But based on everything that you just said, it's utterly reasonable to believe that you can provide us right now a list of the tech projects that we can expect to be resurfaced this year. If it's a 2-year-long process, then last year, the places that are expected to be resurfaced under tech contracts were determined for what is going to get done under a tech contract this year. That information already exists in somebody's hands, if what you're saying is true, which I believe it is. And if there's any chance of that being executed, then so are the plans for each and every one of those things that we expect to actually be resurfaced this year, as distinct from things that we're going to identify this year that might not be resurfaced until next year. When can I expect a list of all of the places that the tech division contracts are expected to have resurfaced this year and the plans for every one of those projects. Yeah.
No, I'm just going to say that, like Luciano said, we're still waiting to get through the final list. So I'm going to tell you that once we're through the final listings, we can provide you with the plans. They're still sorting through the final, like how he noted, waiting for final council lists, and then we're.
But the council list doesn't have anything to do with the tech plans. It's only to do with the internal street neighborhood level stuff. So.
Go ahead.
So if it's a political issue, it's not on the council to determine these tech projects. That's on the mayor's office or it's internal to DOT. And the process that was just explained is that it's a 2-year-long process. And so I would believe that last year, these tech projects for this year's actual construction were already determined. Are they not?
No, it's a portion of it is determined, and it was the same list that you saw last year. You saw a list last year that showed the projects that carried through through fiscal year 26. So a portion of that list has been completed, and the list will continue through to the end of fiscal year 26. And then the next 2-year cycle starts over again.
So we have the list from last year. The list from last year, because there was a dust up over this, right? There was basically, the DOT said that we were going to do X number of lane miles this
Yeah.
year, and we didn't actually achieve
Yeah, and
this.
there's a-
And then it was explained after the fact, no, some of these things take more than 1 year. When we said we were going to do them this year, we didn't actually mean we were going to do them this year. We meant we were going to plan to do them, basically.
Well, that's not, but I understand your
Yeah,
context.
and so there are things from that list that was published last year that are still unfinished, and presumably everything on that list from last year has plans. Can we at the very least get an updated status on all of the things that were on that list last year and the plans associated with each of those projects?
And they're finalizing the plans. As soon as we have the finalized plans, we can discuss that, absolutely.
Okay, when will we have finalized plans?
I can follow up with my resurfacing folks and get back to you.
Okay.
I also want to quickly add that we have been providing briefings to council members as plans are prepared for each resurfacing project. So for example, we offered a briefing to a few council members on this committee about the Fremont Avenue project, which is resurfacing. Part of the issue is that when we release an orange cone list, it's kind of a misnomer because most of those projects aren't going to start the same year that they're released. The 2025 list, for example, should really have been considered the fiscal year 26 through 27 list, because even though we produced the orange cone list in, like during fiscal year 25, those projects aren't actually going to start as part of the FY25 budget. They'll start as part of the FY26 capital budget. So while it's too late this year to change the process of releasing the orange cone list, that's something that we really want to revisit so that we can make it clear that internal resurfacing will happen within the same year and the capital resurfacing is going to take longer, but we are going to do all of those miles that we say we're going to do. It's just going to be a longer process. So this year, I don't think we'll be able to provide those two separately, but we've been talking about it, and we want to be better about letting our residents know this is everything you can expect over the next couple of years.
That's great. My point is, we can't uphold and do not uphold. We're consistent about this. Year over year, we are consistent about not upholding effectively the standard that we make the safety improvements that we're required to make. and that it is like clockwork that we fail to do that. And that my annual request to have that list and those plans very early in the year is because DOT does not do it like clockwork. They do not uphold the requirements to make safety improvements. And that the existence of plans is how it's the only tool that I could possibly have to say, so these are the streets that DOT plans to resurface. These are the plans that you've developed for it. This is how these plans are deficient in carrying out the standard to make safety improvements. If I can't get those plans at all, I can't even enter into a conversation with DOT about this, and certainly not at a time when it actually matters. If you produce the plans 1 week before you start the actual work, if you contract out, we're gonna send this company out here to resurface this area, we'll get you the plans when it's closer to the date, then there's no chance.
I understand that. You'll have plans well before we're sending out the
All right, cool.
contractors. And I want to also note, we spent a considerable amount of time this year after, last year I had just gotten here, but like knowing that there had been some gaps and cracks between the communications of traffic to tech as far as the resurfacing goes, and making sure that the communication was early and often as far as the safety implementations that needed to happen in the resurfacing projects. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, if I stop right now, it'll still say noon on this clock when I finish. I told Councilman Parker I would go to him. Keep it brief.
Very brief. Just a note, it's around community outreach, but it also goes back to the way that we're deploying our transportation enforcement officers and their very valuable time. I and our staff have run into TEOs representing and speaking at community association meetings in the evening times. They've been very effective communicators. They've had great information. It was good to have them there, and I also couldn't stop myself from asking the question to myself as to why they weren't out giving tickets instead of sitting for an hour and a half in a community association meeting. And so they were really, really great ambassadors for the department. And also, I wonder if there aren't other members of the staff whose priorities or whose responsibilities are communication and community outreach, and that would free up our TEOs to be out giving out tickets in the community. So just a note for you all. The second I know, we had lots of conversation around crossing guards and hiring for crossing guards. Is there any update I know there were some crossing guard recruitment attempts over the course of the fall. Any numbers on those? If not, I would make a request just to see where we stand on our staffing goals and recruitment for crossing guards.
We just had a job fair yesterday, actually, recruiting for TOs and crossing guards. And those were the two most sought after groups of people we were looking for. I can follow up with our HR director and see what it looked like as far as applicant levels for both TOs and crossing guards, and get back to you.
I'd love to have that information, and also then where that stands in terms of maybe once the dust settles on that, where we stand in terms of our budgeted positions versus actual staff right now. Thank you so much.
Okay, sure.
Thank you, everybody, including all who, by their mere presence, brought their gravitas to this conversation. I appreciate all of you, all of your time, and your support in this collaborative process of looking for better outcomes. Thank you. We're in recess.